They will never understand. They will never care. Many of them will not give a damn. But I am not one of them. One year ago today, George Floyd's life came to an end. A brutal, tortuous, violent end. George Floyd was 46 years of age, and he was troubling no one in Minneapolis, Minnesota. It was a Monday night, May the 25th, 2020. It also happened to be Memorial Day, the holiday that people here in the United States observe and commemorate each and every year to remember those who gave their lives for the country. On that day, I had actually been in the Presidio in San Francisco, California, at the headstones for the fallen in the Memorial Park area of the Presidio. I was paying my respects to those who had sacrificed their lives. It was a bright sunny day on that Monday, May the 25th, 2020. I seem to remember it being especially warm that day. I took pictures. I walked around, took everything in stride, and was really deep in thought about those who lost their lives, who gallantly fought for the United States of America. I read a lot of the inscriptions on those headstones, monitored and noticed the flags, looked at some of the names inscribed, and the years and how young people were. Many were in their 20s. Some were younger than that. And so when I got home, it was something that I seem to remember that later on that night, or maybe the next morning, came this horrible news about George Perry Floyd Jr. Who was George Perry Floyd Jr.? He was a human being. On this edition of the Politicrat, I'm going to be talking about George Floyd, his legacy, the kind of person he was, and what we all must do to fight on in his name and the name of many, many other Black people and brown people whose lives have been violently taken by police, particularly white police, throughout the United States of America and beyond. It's been exactly 1 year. 1 year later. Now, dear listener, you know I've talked to you a lot on the Politicrat Daily podcast about making your own podcast. And let me tell you something, Anchor gives you the best opportunity to do that. It's free of charge. Yes, it's free. And there are lots of creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your own phone or computer. How about that? And you can even add songs to your podcast from Spotify. It's really wonderful. You can do this, and it really is very easy. And Anchor will even distribute your podcast for you. It can be heard on all kinds of platforms, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. And you can make some money too. And money making is a good thing. It's everything you need in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. So who was George Floyd? George Floyd was me. George Floyd was you. And you. And you. And you. And you. If you are black, if you are brown, George Floyd was you. And you were George Floyd. You could have been George Floyd. You still might be George Floyd. Not for anything that George Floyd did, but for everything that the racist society and the murdering cops that it produces in its system did. This is a very painful day. And on this Tuesday, May the 25th, 2021, on this 1 year mark of a very, very horrific and painful event in the history of this country, what I'm going to do is talk about George Floyd, the person, talk about his legacy, and talk about what we must do 1 year on. George Floyd was 46 years of age. I'm not going to go through the brutal, violent, torturous lynching and execution of that brother. That's not what this episode is going to be about at all. We've all seen parts of, if not all of the video, and we have, if not seen parts of the video, seen still photos from it. And we all know that the 4 killer cops did what they did. One of those murderers has been convicted and was convicted just last month. Of course, there are still open questions as to whether the verdict will be overturned. And next month, Derek Chauvin, the murderer Derek Chauvin, will be sentenced. One of the things I've always talked about is that we must keep the pressure on to ensure that the sentencing is the way it should be, which is maximum charges, maximum sentences rather, that total at least 60 years, 60 years behind bars. George Floyd was a father, a son, a brother, an uncle, a mentor, a comforter, a friend, a security guard. man of faith, a volunteer. I wish he was with us right now. I wish that I didn't have to, dear listener, go through an episode like this. And I wish that his family, first and foremost, did not have to go through all of this pain and suffering. And even more than that, I wish that we could have turned the clock back and that George Floyd himself did not have to go through 10 agonizing, torturous minutes. And I also wish that that murdering bastard, Derek Chauvin, had been taken off the force with complaint number 1, and not after 19 complaints and a guilty verdict finally caught up with him. George Floyd was known as a mama's boy, and he took every moment, it seemed, of his life to tell his mother how much he loved her and loved her dearly. George Floyd was committed to family. He has a wonderful daughter. I think she's 7 or 8 years old now. Her name is Gianna. George Floyd, she said, changed the world. My daddy's going to change the world. And I don't think she's far off in that assessment for a 7-year-old. Oh, I know that there are going to be tough times ahead for Gianna Floyd. I can only envision it now. The pain, growing up without her father. For any daughter, that will be a very difficult thing indeed. For anyone who has lost a loved one, moving on through life without them in your life, without their presence live in front of you, is always going to be an incredibly difficult thing. Maybe you can feel that person that you care about, who is no longer here physically. You can probably say that they talk to you and you to them every day. And then maybe Gianna's had some conversations with her dad, even though he's no longer physically present. George Floyd really did care about the people he grew up amongst. He wanted to help, and he did help. He was a mentor to so many people. People in his community who had their struggles, as did he. People who looked up to him. He had a really special friendship and relationship with one of his brothers who really was kind of a son to him. It's either a brother or a cousin, but George treated him like his own son. George Floyd was someone who had gifts of all kinds, including the gift of athleticism and skill. He attended college. He did various jobs, drove trucks, was a teacher for people, a mentor for people at least, a comforter in times of need. George was someone who had a laugh that lit up the world and a smile that lit up the world. He was a good, decent person from all accounts. Someone who wanted to help. Someone who was there. Someone who believed in people. And believed in the best in people. It is always something that in these times, perfection should never be required of anyone. Not you, not me, not George Floyd. And with any struggle that we all go through in life, at some point in our life, it is increasingly and ever more urgent and important to understand that perfection should never be the goal. People are not perfect. You can be great, said Dina Asher Smith, the athlete, without being perfect. George Floyd was great. George Floyd was great. He was the big brother. He was the mentor. He was the father. He was the teacher. He was the leader. A protector. An athlete. A college attendee. A man of faith. A volunteer in the church. I wish George Floyd were here, and I know his family obviously does too. This is a really sad day, and I really want that family to know that I support them 100%, because it never gets easier from here. It never does. And indeed, the Spinners, I'll be around. And this is a special edition of the Politicrat Daily Podcast. I hope you are well on this Tuesday, May 25th, 2021. It's the 1-year mark of the murder and torture and execution of George Perry Floyd Jr., who was just 46 years of age. This is a particularly difficult day, and forgive me, dear listener, for you understand. So I cannot imagine. Just if I feel the way I do, and if you feel the way you do, just think about that family. Just for 5 minutes, think about the family of George Perry Floyd Jr., how they feel today. This is actually also a celebration of George Floyd, and despite my profound sadness on this day, I just want to thank the Floyd family for this special individual that graced this earth for just such a short time. Because even though I never knew George Floyd Jr., I feel like I knew him. I really do. I felt it a year ago, and I feel it today. And because he could have been me, I could have been him. I was him. He was me. As I said earlier. So, I'm really sorry for your loss. I am really sorry. Profoundly sorry. But as sorry as I am, as heartbroken as I am, it's nothing compared to how you're feeling. And from here, there is a mission that we all, myself, obviously, to start with, from my own personal selfish view that I have to undertake. And whatever mission that is for you, dear listener, it is to find something that you can do in your life that furthers the legacy of George Perry Floyd. And in addition to that, continuing to fight for justice in the way that his family is doing for other families who have lost their loved ones to the violence of the system, of the police in that system. There is something special and profound and uplifting, even in the very sad and difficult circumstances of and for a family who has lost someone to violent killer cops, to still have the wherewithal and the strength to fight for other families, like the family of Breonna Taylor, for example, to name just one person. That takes a lot of strength, like fighting for and with the family, alongside the family of Daunte Wright in Brooklyn Center, Minnesota, not far away from the Hennepin County Courthouse where that murdering bastard, Derek Chauvin, was convicted last month. It takes that kind of inner fortitude. And I think sometimes we look at these families as if they're somehow robotic. We expect these families to be so poised. And, you hear about this, in the news. Oh, they're so poised. These pundits that come on and make these assessments about the demeanors of the family, the demeanor of the family, as if they're supposed to have a particular demeanor for these pundits to feel comfortable enough with. And, you get these pundits, they start to grade. In a way, they start to grade the demeanors of the families who've just had a loved one violently taken from them forever. And it's as if they are evaluating a freaking Eurovision Song Contest or an ice dance routine or a gymnastics routine that Simone Biles just completed. It's just crazy. Well, their demeanor, they're handling this so well. I think that speaks to something really pathological and evil about the people who would say those kinds of things, about families who've lost loved ones to these violent-ass, murdering, thuggish police. There's something about anyone that would go, oh, they're handling it so well. How do you know what they're going through? I don't. I can only imagine. But until it's happened to us, how would we know what the family of George Floyd or Breonna Taylor or Daunte Wright or Jordan Davis or Trayvon Martin or Tamir Rice or Eric Garner or Sandra Bland or Rakia Boyd or Adam Toledo or Andrew Brown Jr.? How would we know what they're going through, those families? Rayshard Brooks' family. I don't want the family of George Floyd to be evaluated. I want to be fighting alongside them for justice. I want to keep doing that, and I aim to. We all have a stake in this, and if we want to change this world that we live in, and if we want to do respect to the memory of George Floyd Jr., and to show his daughter, Gianna Floyd, that we care about her and that we care about her dad and about all people who have been murdered by the police, then we have to keep fighting. We can't stay silent. We have our voices and we have breath in our bodies. And as long as we have those things, we should keep speaking up and out. It's the very least we can do. I think one of the things we can also do is be the example of George Floyd. Be that mentor in someone's life. Be that teacher. Be that comforter. Be that leader. Be that helping hand. Be that person that tries to brighten up someone's day. As many people, including George Floyd's girlfriend, would say and has said about George Floyd, that he did help brighten people's day. Like his brother Philoneus said about George wanting to be there, and that he was a mama's boy. Maybe you can be the example of George Floyd by calling someone in your family that you haven't spoken to for a long time. Not because of any pandemic, but because maybe you've fallen out with a family member. Maybe they've disowned you. Maybe you've disowned them. Why not place that phone call? George Floyd was the kind of person who would have done something like this. He would have persuaded people. And I know he would have. He would have persuaded you, if he were here, to pick up that phone and talk to that relative, talk to that estranged person in your life, who is, I guess, out of your life at the moment, or has been for some time. And he would tell you, make good with them. Doesn't matter what they say back to you. It doesn't matter how they receive you. You make the attempt to make good with that person. And when you've done your bit, then that is all that you can do. You cannot be responsible for how the person you reach out to responds to you. So I would say that that would be one thing that we also could do in these times and beyond. I definitely think that that's a healing thing. A third thing that we can do and must do is tell the United States Senate to pass the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act. The George Floyd Justice in Policing Act is something that the United States House of Representatives passed last year. Now that the United States Senate is in Democratic control, barely, but is in Democratic control, the onus is on the House Democrats to get this done. The Senate Democrats to get this done. And the Democrats in the Senate are pretty much committed to it, despite the behavior of two of those Democrats. And you know which two I'm speaking about. But the thing that we must do, dear listener, is make sure that we get on the phone at 202-225-3121 and contact Republican senators and tell those Republican senators that they must vote yes and pass the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act. What that act specifies, in part, is the end of no-knock warrants, the kind that ended the life of Breonna Taylor, with these killer cops who murdered her just over a year ago in Kentucky. The George Floyd Justice in Policing Act would ban chokeholds. Those are just two of the things that it would do. There's also, I believe, a qualified immunity provision that will be ended. Now, I don't know if that's the bone of contention, because the police unions have too much power in the United States. They have way too much power. They have more power than the average union does. And there's very few of the average unions left. But one of the great things we can do to preserve the legacy of George Floyd is to get on the horn right now. Get on the horn and call 202-225-3121 or 202-224-3121. and ask to speak to Republican senators. Call each and every one of them and tell them to please pass the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act. Stress upon them that it has been 1 year, exactly 1 year. 1 year since the murder and execution of George Perry Floyd Jr. And if those Republican senators say they're pro-life, then this bill, the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act, would be the ultimate pro-life measure. So we all must do this. We all must contact these Republicans. It doesn't matter what these Republicans say publicly or what the pundits say about them when it comes to this bill or any other bill. We still have to do the work. It's what George Floyd certainly would have done. He was all things to a lot of people who needed him. And he got a great joy, a great level of joy in being around his family, whom he loved so dearly. We have to be activists. This society and the way it's behaving towards us demands that we must all be activists in some way, shape, or form. It doesn't matter who you are. We must be our own brothers and sisters keepers, and we must look out for each other. We must make our causes the causes of others and vice versa. We have to. This is about countering a violent system that ended the life of George Floyd, that murdered him. The fourth thing we can do to honor George Floyd's legacy is to donate money to the George Floyd Memorial Foundation. George Floyd Memorial Foundation is the foundation that is the only foundation that is officially created by the family members of George Floyd. It's the only one. It is authentic. Accept no imitations. If you want to donate to the George Floyd Memorial Foundation, please go to georgefloydmemorialfoundation.org and please donate there. There is a store there as well, and some really good t-shirts. I urge you to go to that store, and I urge you to donate as well. That's the fourth thing you can do to honor the legacy of George Floyd and uphold him. A fifth thing you can do is to teach your kids about who George Floyd was and about what happened to him, obviously. There is no one in the world of a certain age who doesn't know who George Floyd was, or at the very least what happened to him. But if you have children, some of whom may be under the age of, say, 10 or 8 years old, there's a good chance that if your child is under the age of 8 or under the age of 6 or 7 or so, they will not know who or understand who George Floyd is, who he was, and what he meant. So when that child gets a bit older, or even right now, you should teach your child about George Floyd and about what happened to him and about what your child can do for awareness and education. Education never starts too early when it comes to children. All the proceeds from the official store that you can find at GeorgeFloydMemorialFoundation.org benefit and help the foundation itself. It gives out scholarships and mentorships and all kinds of things and important work that foundation does. So please, make sure you visit that webpage and donate. Donate today. And another thing you can do, I think this is the 6th now, or so, that you can do to honor the legacy of George Floyd is to, if you so desire, run for political office, no matter what kind, whether it is dog catcher or school board or mayor or city council person or senator or governor or house member or president. And make sure you run on a platform of anti-racism, de-escalation of policing, reducing the funding of police, and dismantling a system that allows killer cops to keep killing without punishment while they kill with impunity. Those are things you can do. Just a few of the things you can do to honor the legacy of George Perry Floyd Jr.
I finally have the opportunity for hopefully getting some sleep. A lot of days that I prayed and I hoped and I was speaking everything into existence. I said, I have faith that he will be convicted. It's been a long journey. And it's been less than a year. And the person that comes to my mind is 1955. And to me, he was the first George Floyd. That was Emmett Till.
Wow. Wow.
I did was on CNN with Deborah Watts, and she just brought him back to life.
Wow.
People forgot about him.
Yeah.
But he was the first George Floyd.
Yes.
But today, you have the cameras all around the world to see and show what happened to my brother. It was a motion picture. The world seeing his life being extinguished. And I could do nothing but watch. Especially in that courtroom over and over and over again as my brother was murdered. Times, they're getting harder every day.
That was part of the press conference last month that Thelonious Floyd held with other members of the George Floyd family, along with Reverend Sharpton, Reverend Jesse Jackson, Attorney Ben Crump, Attorney Chris Stewart, and a number of other attorneys. Literally, that was about an hour after Derek Chauvin was convicted by a jury of all counts of murder and manslaughter. So that's the Thelonious Floyd. And, well, faith. Some people believe in all of that and some people don't. But whatever your position on any of these things is, you have to respect the power of belief. And Thelonious Floyd, for him it was no doubt. He never had a doubt for this conviction, whereas persons like myself had every doubt about whether or not we would have seen what happened on April 20th of this year, 2021. Because I did not think that Derek Chauvin would be convicted of a darn thing. And I was proven wrong, thank goodness. Believe me, I wanted him to be convicted of everything, and I'm glad he was. But we have to keep the pressure on. And that's one of the things I think I mentioned in the legacy, that we have to keep the pressure on. And I'll mention it now. That's another thing we need to do, is make sure that Derek Chauvin gets the maximum. The max gets the book thrown at him. Because anything less is completely unacceptable. Anything else just isn't cricket. And what's more, Gianna Floyd deserves a whole lot more than some mediocre sentence for the murderer of her father, who she will grow up without. It's been a long, difficult year. It really has been a long, difficult year for the family of George Floyd. And during the course of that year, there were millions of people around the world. Maybe that millions of people included you, who marched during this COVID pandemic and virus be damned, and marched in their thousands and hundreds of thousands and millions all across this planet to say enough is enough, to say that Black Lives Matter, to say justice for George Floyd. To say defund the police, abolish the police, the killer cops. Because I am all in favor of that. Abolishing killer cops. We don't want police forces around with killers in them. And we have to look at policing and demand that policing be something completely different to what it has been. Because its origins in the enslavement patrols in the United States still inform the way these killer cops behave in 2021 and beyond. And if we don't put an end to a system like that, how many more George Floyds and Breonna Taylors do you think there will be? How many more Breonna Taylors? How many more Dante Wrights? How many more Adam Toledos? Rayshard Brookses, Sandra Bland's, Tatiana Jefferson's? Do you think there is going to be? How many do you think there will be? It is Tuesday, May the 25th, 2021. It's been 1 year. It really has been one long year. And I know that President Biden will be meeting with the family of George Floyd. And I suppose that's a nice gesture. But what we need is justice for all families who've lost loved ones at the hands of these murdering cops. And we must all get involved. Rest in power, George Floyd. We love you, brother.
That's right. Daddy changed the world.
He did what?
That changed the world.
Daddy changed the world.